Welcome to KSOK Uncensored. Tonight's guest is Kayleigh Kozak, the namesake for Kayleigh's Law. Kayleigh, I want to thank you for coming on and for not only telling your personal story, but sharing with us what drove you to fighting for victims of sexual abuse. I should say survivors, because that's really what's happening. You're fighting for them, not only for their justice, but for protection. How did you get into this? And talk to us about the Kayleigh's Law as a whole.
So in 2020, my world flipped upside down, and not because of most people's worlds being flipped upside down, but it was because I received a phone call notifying me that the man who sexually abused me when I was in middle school was petitioning to have his so-called lifetime probation lifted. And because he's completed his treatment and been good, there was a chance that he could actually have his probation completely terminated. And when I asked what protection would be in place for me if that was lifted, they told me none. There was no such thing as protection that came post
Wow.
probation. Yeah.
Wow.
So
So I'm curious because I don't know, for a lot of people that don't know a lot about the system and what a protection really covers, when they say your protections will be lifted, what protections are they talking about?
So in this case specifically, or this situation, a perpetrator has terms of probation. And one of those terms would be that you cannot contact your victim in any way. And obviously the
Mm,
laws have had to kind of change along the way because now there's like technology and things, and that wasn't implemented into
right.
law for a long time. But if they were to contact you, then they would be violating the terms of their probation, and therefore they would face repercussion. The problem
Okay.
was if probation was gone, and there was nothing in place to protect a victim, what's stopping them from showing up at your front door? What's stopping them from harassing
Right.
you online? Exactly.
Right. Because we all know that the system, we just don't have enough in place as far as the justice system is concerned when it comes to anything that has to do with the phone, online, stalking, bullying. I mean, we really are still way behind as far as all of that is concerned. I think law enforcement in general, they wait for something to actually happen physically before they do much. So that's very concerning.
It is. And I said, why do we have to be reactive? Why can't we be proactive? And if you're
Right.
going to have a pathway off for these offenders to have their probation lifted, why would we not be proactive and have protection for the victim? Why would we even give them the opportunity to even attempt to contact their victim? And
Right.
a lot of backlash that I got was it's just a piece of paper. It is just a
Mm.
piece of paper. It's just like a restraining order, just like an injunction against harassment. However, if they have put in the work to get off their probation and there's a consequence in place for them if they contact the victim,
Right.
they're going to be a lot less likely to attempt to contact them. And that was the goal, again, to be proactive instead of reactive. We're never going to be
Right.
bulletproof, but we can offer
Right.
things that narrow the gaps.
It sounds like really the justice system as a whole is broken. And for people to say it's just a piece of paper, people are so dumb and out of touch. And, that's coming from someone who's probably never experienced anything in their life, anything close to what you've experienced. So for someone to offer their their opinion on that is really disgusting. I want to talk about Kayleigh's Law because I know that you've been very active and you've been working towards having Kayleigh's Law in place. Right now you have it in 2 states, but what all went into it? What is it, one, but what all went into making it a thing in the first place?
So, Kayleigh's Law gives victims and survivors of sexual abuse natural life protection. And what I learned through the process is how critical and important terminology is. We had to include natural in front of protection because or lifetime because lifetime doesn't actually mean lifetime. There's no definition, which is insane to me. So we included natural. It gives a victim protection for their natural life. Prior to Kayleigh's Law, a victim's only protection came within the terms of the perpetrator's probation status. And that is why this law is so important and so necessary and needed, because we're at a place now where we know we are a pro-criminal system. There's more
Mm,
concern for the criminals than there is for any victim of anything. I mean, America 2023, where victims are treated like criminals and criminals are treated like victims. That's just where we're at. That's the definition
Yes.
I would give America right now. So this law, it was so important that we put this in place to give victims that added layer of protection that they rightfully deserve, especially because they're allowing these offenders to get off their probation, their lifetime probation.
Wow. That's powerful stuff right there. And again, for someone that hasn't been through it, they would not even begin to understand how important that is. And so what I'm curious about is so natural life, because as we all know, yeah, someone gets a 99-year sentence and then they're out in 13 years. I mean, it's just crazy. I listen to true crime all the time and I'm just blown away with how a sentence can just be hacked down to almost nothing. So natural life. So it is important. So it's all these loopholes. You're really closing loopholes. I know that that's one of your focuses, which is so critical. And the amount of loopholes that exist today is infinite. So I love that
Yeah,
you're taking a stand and doing something with that. What other loopholes have you discovered through your research?
that's what's crazy is I am convinced the laws are the way that they're written is to create loopholes in the system.
Mm,
The loose terminology, the specific language that's used or not used, the way that these laws are drafted and actually put into place with no consequences attached, they're just simply recommendations. And it gives flexibility for the prosecutors, the judges. There's no true accountability. And so they're able to basically get together and say, what makes you look good? What makes me look good? We don't want to
wow.
go to court. Let's just meet in the middle where everyone wins, basically. But the
Wow.
problem with that we're encountering is now these offenders are they're taking all these plea deals left and right, and they're lying to victims. They're not being transparent, and they give these offenders the treatment. And I say that loosely, treatment.
Right,
But
right, right.
I'm almost more convinced they're teaching them and showing them where the loopholes are. It is
Oh,
insane the amount of
probably.
loopholes. Yeah. Treatment, nah, more like educating, I feel like. So the
Wow.
problem is that there are all these loopholes that exist and no one is calling them out. And if I'll tell you one of the most frustrating things is people will say to me, this happened to you, move on, live your life, But yes, what happened to me did happen when I was younger, and it was horrible and it never should have happened. But I'm
Right,
also living this right now. These things that are happening, I'm living. And that is how I am able to expose the amount of loopholes and to the severity, I mean, how big they are, and
right.
draft such very specific language to close those loopholes. And boy, am I being attacked left and right.
Oh, I can only imagine. And you're a mother of 5, and you know how much you wanna protect your babies, and that has to drive you in what you're doing.
Absolutely. It absolutely does. And for my kids, but for other survivors, because if this is what
Right,
I'm dealing with, I cannot imagine what other survivors are dealing with. And
right.
we will never be bulletproof, but we can narrow the gaps to prioritize the protection of our children. And as you know, that's just not a thing right now. People don't really want to do that.
No. So I live in Oregon, so I'm not too far from you, but it was really wild. I'm on Nextdoor. I don't really type much on there, but it's interesting to go on and see what people are posting. So we are in the land of the weird here, right outside of Portland. And recently someone put on there, I just moved to the neighborhood. I'm a trans man. Does anyone have any problems with it? Excuse me, trans woman. And one, to me, it's
Yeah.
like such an unnecessary post. So I said back, I'm curious why you felt this was something that you needed to post. And then, of course, oh my gosh, I got attacked from so many different angles just for asking that. And basically, in a nutshell, people were saying if it's not happening in your living room, mind your business. So that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to allow children to be groomed and taken advantage of and abused. As long as it's not our kids, it should be okay according to all these people that chimed in. So, and that really it seems to match up to the justice system. Are you getting some of the same takeaways when you're reviewing what's happening out there?
Absolutely. from the standpoint of our politicians that are in office, our elected officials, and also from people who think that they don't question the law. They don't. The law is
Mm,
the law. You can't. And it's
yeah.
if people would just pay attention and do their research and really look into how things are actually being addressed and taken care of, or not taken care of, maybe a better way to say it, they would
Right.
have an understanding for what's really going on within the law. And I get people all day long, even in the industry, that question me, and they don't believe what I'm saying. But I am so firm and stand in so much truth with the things that I bring forward. And that and the attacks that I get, that's all the affirmation that I need to know that I am on the right path and that I'm doing the work that needs to be
Yes.
done.
Yes. I love that you're staying focused on that because it can be discouraging when people are chiming in with their uneducated opinions, trying to steer you in a direction. But I'm curious, when you knew there was a loophole and there was something you needed to do about it, how does that process look? How do you gain contact with lawmakers? How do you actually ensure that they listen to you? What steps did you take to be heard?
It took me scheduling a meeting with my local legislator. And I think, too, I want to encourage people to remember your elected officials work for you. And if you have
Amen.
to be blunt and bold and remind them, then do so. I was fortunate to have a wonderful elected senator who worked with
Mhm.
me. At first, she did question what I was bringing to the table, not because she didn't believe me, but because it was unbelievable that we were having to draft
Right,
policy for this. And so
right,
as we created an entire new law. Kayleigh's law. Arizona was the first state in the nation to pass this law. And so it almost seems foreign that it wasn't there wasn't language for it. And so
right.
as I've been living this and bringing it to the table and learned that how critical and important words and terminology are, I've really gained some amazing, incredible allies down at the legislature here in Arizona that now understand that this is a real problem and it needs
Mm.
some major, major work.
And that's refreshing to hear. I'm glad that you had that experience, and I think there are still sensible people that have been elected into office, and they need someone to wake them up and keep them on track and keep them honest. As sad as that is, I'm glad that you had a good experience. Talk to us about Katie Hobbs is there in Arizona now, unfortunately. Talk to us about she's been vetoing some of your proposed bills left and right. SB 1253. I found that one specifically interesting that she had the gall to veto that. Can you tell us about that?
So that one's a little complex, but I'll get it out as quickly as I can
All
as
right.
Reader's Digest. So in Arizona, there's three levels of sex offenders. And what determines the risk level of a sex offender is not their crime. It's a 19 question general risk assessment. It's a point-based assessment. So
Mm,
people think a lower level offender is like someone who urinates in public. That is not at all what a level 1 sex offender is. Now, level 1 sex offenders are not listed on the public registry. Only level 2 and level 3. So we already have a problem there. So people are like, "Oh, I
right.
looked at all the right dots." And I'm like, "Your next door neighbor could be a level 1 sex offender and you would have no way of knowing because they're protected
Wow.
ultimately." So the problem with that was that we discovered only level 2 and level 3 sex offenders have to notify the school in the district which they live. Problem with
Okay.
that is Arizona is school choice. So most kids do not go to the school in the district which they live. So now if
Interesting.
you have an offender that's in district A and their kids are in district B, they don't have to notify the school that they're a sex offender. And
Oh,
so we
wow.
drafted SB 1253, which would have required, again, we have to be very specific with the language and we have to start
Mhm.
somewhere. So it would have required a registered sex offender with parental rights to notify their children's school of their status. That's how this law came, or this possible law came to be. We got a
Okay.
lot of backlash from the Democrats. I was very surprised because they didn't like who was notifying the school. That was the reason. I shouldn't say I was surprised. I was surprised
Interesting.
at the reason they came up with.
Right,
And
right.
so we tried to work with them and find like an in the middle solution. It didn't go very well, but at the end of the day, they don't understand the level. They don't understand that you can have an offender that has a dangerous crime against a child who's a level 1 sex offender. So
Wow.
I don't know that I've ever really spoken about this part before. The reason this came to be was because my kids go to private school. The school I intended to send them to is the sister private school that has a high
Okay.
school. We don't have a high school. Can you imagine how I felt when I discovered that my abuser's kids went to that school?
Oh, wow.
And
Unimaginable.
they had no idea he was a sex offender. Why? Because
Wow.
he's level 1 and because he's not on the DPS public registry. And
Wow.
so that just goes to show, like, I'm living this, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's
And
why
so
this,
he's
and if this
freely
week,
so he's able to freely interact with the other kids at his kid's school because they're not aware of this?
yeah, they would have no way
Wow.
of knowing he was an offender.
Wow. Wow.
No
Yeah,
way.
that brings it home. That really does. And the fact that you came that close to having that exchange or that interaction or that closeness, that nauseating. I can't even imagine. And so
And to
this
have,
SB 1253 would have closed that loophole.
it would have, because he's a parent and it would have required him to notify his children's school of his status.
Mm.
And he is he's sexually abused. He was a PE teacher and a club soccer coach who abused his student.
Oh,
The school
wow.
should
Wow.
absolutely be made aware. And his daughter
Wow.
is the same age that I was when he was abusing me, which is super
Mm.
concerning.
Yeah.
So yeah, to know that that would have closed that loophole. And these offenders know they can't look me up. They know that they only have to notify the school and the district which they live. And to know this would have closed that loophole, and Queen Veto herself vetoed it, saying that there's already procedures in place, was so, I mean,
Clearly
I can't
not.
tell you. No. It was so disappointing and disgusting because ultimately she prioritized protecting a pedophile's identity and
Right.
status over protecting children in schools.
Wow. And that really shows you where we're at as a nation. I think about, so we're okay with protecting a perp, but like for instance, the Portland Police Bureau, they have all their names and addresses. It was court ordered that they were released. Anyone that was part of
Yeah.
the rioting, my husband was included in all of that. So it's like we're gonna release all these people that protect the city and protect people, but we're gonna protect the perp, the bad guy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
completely backwards. So you tweeted out that you were disgusted with the veto, and what do they call it? X now? You X'd out, but at that point it was Twitter. So you tweeted that out. Tell us about the ramifications from that.
So what's so funny about that is I hardly ever use Twitter, but it was session and I know all the
Same.
legislators are on there. So I tweeted, Governor Hobbs has vetoed SB 1253. I am disgusted. Thank you, Senator Shamp, for sponsoring this bill. And the
Mm.
next day, I got a phone call from Maricopa County Attorney's Office informing me that my speaking engagement and my award had been revoked due to being openly critical of a government official.
Wow. I mean, that sounds like something you'd see in the USSR, right? Like that is like something we shouldn't be seeing here in the United States. So it really shows where we're at. So they were able to legally keep you from getting an award and speaking at this event.
Yes. And the worst part for me was that our Maricopa County attorney, Rachel Mitchell, was the prosecutor on my case. And her
Oh,
office is who called
wow.
and informed me that they were revoking the award and the speaking engagement. And they
Wow.
wouldn't even let me come to the event. Not that I wanted to go, but with
Mm.
no other reason than that I was openly critical of a government official and they could not have me on stage with her.
Wow. Can you even imagine? I can't even imagine we're living in this type of environment today. I want to hear about, I know I listened to a podcast that you were on recently, and you talked about there's one of the largest churches in Arizona, I believe it was CCB Church, where they have an outreach program where they are reaching out to sex offenders to bring them to church. What's the goal? To ultimately bring them to Christ?
I
I
wish I
don't
knew.
quite understand this.
I I wish I knew, but again, imagine how I felt when I discovered that this was actually happening. So they
Right.
work with a organization called Rescued Not Arrested, and it's at a prison outreach
Mm,
program, which I'm not opposed to. I think that's
right.
wonderful. And I am not even opposed to offenders attending church. We all need Jesus. What I am opposed to is lazy, naive Christians who are not holding these people accountable. We
Right.
can still be compassionate and accepting while holding these people accountable for their behaviors. What's been so
Right.
frustrating with that situation is that the church had no intention of ever coming forward with this information until they were basically forced to do so through social media. And
Mm,
then to also be attacked for that when I stand in truth, they know I stand in truth. They know I have proof of everything. They know. And they gave a very surface, lawyer driven response on my social media. They've yet to address it with the congregation. And they openly said they currently have 32 known sex offenders that are attending that church. And what you have to understand is CCV is arguably the most family oriented church in the state of Arizona. They're massive.
wow.
I mean, their sports program has 15,000 kids enrolled.
Wow,
And for
that's
people,
huge.
yep. And for and the guy who started it, the program, he is one of the individuals within the church that knowingly allowed this registered sex offender to be around children. And people have said to me,
Wow.
it's a rigorous background check. I've been through the process in the volunteer program. So have I. I used to
Mm.
serve at that church. But when your senior pastor, one of the board members, and someone else within the church are knowingly allowing a registered sex offender to bypass those safety protocols and be around children, there's a problem. It's no
Big
different than if you have
problem.
a principal and a board member and a sports coach say, oh, yeah, we know you're a sex offender. We know you molested a little girl, but you can just still come around and be here. But people
Wow.
don't like when you attack their church and their baby. And I'm very hurt and disappointed with the way the church has handled this. I think that they owe their congregation transparency. They're
Right.
not doing so. They're just sweeping it under the rug, and I guess ultimately hoping that it will go away. Um, I don't know that I would say that I agree that they have been open and forthcoming. I've gotten hundreds of screenshots of email responses from people reaching out to them. So it's very concerning. And if this is what we know about within the church, what do we not know?
Right.
And
Absolutely.
it's I mean, they allowed him to attend a father-daughter dance.
Oh,
I
jeez.
just the list goes on, and there's been no accountability for the people who allowed this to happen, and that's very concerning to me as well. Very concerning.
Absolutely. And the abuse can happen anywhere, as we all know. It can happen at church, it can happen in the home, it can anywhere. So to think you're going to church, you're bringing your kids to the youth group, and to think that that's happening unbeknownst to all of the people attending, that's unacceptable. And it's interesting because I'm Christian also, and I am not afraid to call out wimpy Christians just like you, because it's really frustrating when everything was really going down here hot and heavy in June of 2020 in Portland. It was wild how many people that are people I know from church, Christian school my kids attended at one point, and they said, I want to be Christ-like and not take a stance on this, as far as not calling out the BLM movement or just Antifa. And I was like, you want to be Christ-like? This is the biggest disruptor known to man. And there's so many Christians that are just wimpy and so uneducated on the subject and don't want to rock the boat. And I put a lot
And
of
the
blame on
Bible,
them.
yeah, and the Bible specifically addresses people who harm children. It is so
Mm,
specific. It's mentioned multiple times. It's mentioned in Matthew, it's mentioned in Mark, it's mentioned in Luke. You're better to be thrown into the ocean with a millstone than you are to harm the God's little ones. Yet
Right.
we have these offenders that are not only being recruited to this church, but they're able to groom the community, and then we don't know what their intentions are. And
Right.
there's little to no boundaries and accountability, and we know that that's happening in churches everywhere, and they're so protected
Yes.
within the church. But why are they afraid to put these people, like, we should, our priority should be protecting the children, not including the
Right.
offenders. That
Right.
should
Yeah.
be our priority.
Not the offenders nor their feelings. That should definitely not even be in the equation. I want to talk about the sound of freedom, and I know you have some thoughts on, it drew a lot of attention, but I know what's frustrating for many, yourself included, is the fact that did it really take this movie for people to wake up and realize we have a problem? And then for the problem to be so hyper focused overseas versus right here under our own noses. Uh, Talk to us about, we have 3 minutes left, but I really want to hear your thoughts on the matter and how we got to this point of where we're just so inactive. We see a movie, we get excited, go watch it, and then we feel like we've done our duty for the year.
Absolutely. You can hashtag, right? Buy a t-shirt.
Yep.
The movie was great. I think people left feeling inspired and also almost like disbelief.
Mm,
I believe it's happened. I believe it's real. I know these things are happening overseas. I'm not negating those situations. However, I feel like it was a huge distraction from the trafficking and the things that are happening in our backyard right here in America. And so people got on this bandwagon of like, we need to go overseas and save these kids. And for those of us that have been in the battle for so long, we're like, get involved here. There's local things here. They're just as important. And again, I'm not negating the things that are happening overseas, but we also need to pay attention to what's going on here. The other
right,
frustrating thing was, how long is this going to be trending? It got people's attention. They're going to do their buy a shirt and a hashtag, but then what are they really going to do to get involved? And I don't know about you, but it's been a week or two since I've seen
oh,
anything about
same,
trafficking. Now it's
absolutely.
all about COVID. So it was a trending
Yes.
topic. And that's where it gets very frustrating for, I think, every one of us that's in, even people within that organization. I think it's frustrating
Yeah.
because people jump on and then they don't know what to do. And even if you
Right.
give them a plan of action or things, they want to be that superhero that goes overseas and saves the kid
Right.
and comes back. There's every
Right.
piece so critical in this battle. And I wish people would step into their purpose and where they can actually help, because we'd get a lot further down the road to helping in
Right.
this
Right.
area.
Yeah, I completely agree. And there's so many, I feel like there's a hero complex with some people where they go to the extreme, like, okay, I'm going to go overseas. I know someone who went to Ukraine to go help people, meanwhile, completely abandoning their family here stateside. And there's a lot of resentment from the family here. So it's people need to focus on what is right in front of them versus this, oh, look at me, look what I've achieved. I've gone overseas to go help people. So there's way too much of that. I want to talk about just at the end here, where can people find you, but also how important it is for people to donate to what your cause is and where they can find you. I know we flashed your website up a few times, but if you could go over that again.
Of course. So my website is becauseyoustillmatter.com. And that is why I am fighting so hard for survivors of sexual abuse, is because you still matter. This is not a fun journey. I have really found that my niche and where I feel called to be is in policy. I believe that's where we're going to see the most change. I'm able to look at bills and laws and find the loopholes and bring solutions to the table. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. We will never be bulletproof, but we can narrow the gaps. And that is my mission, is to narrow the gaps in the law to protect victims and survivors, and also to hold the system and these perpetrators accountable. We need more of that. And we can do all the surface work, or we can go get these bad guys or do these things. But if we don't have policy in place to hold them accountable, we're not going to get very far. So that is
Yeah.
my passion and my drive, and that's where I thrive. And I have no intention of stopping. Kayleigh's law has been passed in 40 or 2 states, but 2 states is not enough. We have 48 more
Yeah,
states that this law needs to be passed in, amongst many other updates within policy in this area that we
right.
need to address.
Right. And for those that are going to go check out your website, I know you do mention if for people like me that are in a different state and we'd like to see Kayleigh's Law in our state, it looks like you do have some reference points on how to make that happen for folks that go and visit your site, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Excellent. I think that's super helpful because we're all about action here. Both of us are on the same page with that. We have enough talking heads out there. You have two people here that actually do something about it, and you should be included in that. Thank you so much for coming on and for everything you do. I know the fight is not easy, but we need people like you to fight it. So thank you. I know it is a selfless thing that you're doing, and I have so much respect for you. All right, everyone. Thank you for tuning into KSOK Uncensored. We will see you next Thursday.